Welcome. Today is our Relax into Health, Wealth, and Happiness meeting, and it's nice to have you here. And today I'd like to explore a theme, which is that practice makes perfect. Maybe you've heard that expression. And so I'd like to explore that in some detail, with the intention being that it will help us to see more clearly how it is that what we've been practicing, how we've been practicing, and how we might help ourselves to practice in a way that will be supportive of what we really want in life. So the notion is that practice makes perfect, and it's not that difficult of an idea, of course, to understand on a superficial level, because we can see that that is true. But because it's so simple, I think, like many simple things, we tend to overlook the deeper significance of it. And so we tend to just sort of leap from one superficiality to another superficiality in our lives, and we might scratch our heads wondering why is it that we don't seem to get any deeper meaning with anything, and it's because we're leaping from superficiality to superficiality. So at the superficial level, we can see that it's true. It's not that difficult to understand, because we can recognize that, yes, what I practice, I become better at. So take a very simple, obvious example. Like if I practice uh, practice playing a musical instrument, let's say piano, and I do that every day, if only for 10 minutes. But if I do this every single day for only just 10 minutes, I will get better at playing the piano. Now, I may not become virtuoso, but I will become better at it each day a little bit. And over a significant amount of time, let's say 10 years, if I've practiced every day for 10 minutes for 10 years, I will be substantially better at the 10-year mark than I was at the beginning. And other people might come and hear me play, and they might say, what is the secret? Everybody's always looking for the secret, and there's no big secret. It's just I practiced every day for 10 minutes, and I got better and better, and now I can play this well. So we've all had experience of that, maybe not playing piano, but many things in our lives. I mean, everything is like that. So take anything in your life, and you can see that you were not any skill that you've developed. You were not as good at it as you are now, and you become better at it by practicing. So this is true of every skill that we've developed, and most of those skills, obviously, with something like piano, learning to play a musical instrument, then there was some level of choice in the matter that we can usually be aware of. We can recognize I started playing the piano on X, during at this age, and I made that choice to continue practicing, and I've gotten better. So we can see it in that sense. But it's also true of all the things that we take for granted. So learning to speak a language, which all of us are more or less proficient at, is something that we learned by practicing. We don't recall probably beginning or practicing the language, but we certainly did. And we just did it at a very early age. So we developed, again, very simple premise for those who joined late. The theme for today is practice makes perfect. And so at the superficial level, it's pretty simple. what we practice, we become better at. And if we continue to practice something, then we will get better at that. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't guarantee that we'll become the best at it. It just means that we will get better at it the more that we practice it. Now, as I've already suggested, at the superficial level, that has a lot of merit. I mean, it's a valuable insight, one that we can take advantage of to help ourselves to gain new skills or improve our skills by just applying ourselves to developing a habit of practicing whatever it is that we want to do. So it's valuable on that level, but I'm suggesting here that it has a lot more value to us, and we want to see that by exploring it at a deeper level. So this notion that practice makes perfect is actually true of everything in our lives, and we're constantly practicing every moment of our lives. We can't escape the fact that we're practicing, and that might seem interesting, but consider that you're always doing something, and you might think, oh, I'm not, a lot of the time I'm not doing anything, but you are. You're breathing, you're thinking, you are relating to yourself, relating to others, relating to your experience, relating to the world. So all these are just examples of the many things that you're doing all the time, inescapably. You cannot really stop doing these things. I mean, we could argue that in states of deep meditation, that these things maybe cease, and there may be some validity to that claim. But that's, for the majority of us, that's what we would call an edge case. And even for those who enter into those deep meditative states, still, for most of us, that's not the majority of our time. So the majority of our time still, for almost everybody, involves some kind of doing, some kind of practice. But, and you might have noticed this already, the majority of the practice that you're engaged in more or less all the time is unconscious. So you're practicing all kinds of things, but you have no idea what you're practicing. And that should be maybe, we could say, possibly cause for concern, or at the very least, it should give us pause so that we might become interested and want to study this a bit, start to find out what is it that I'm not so aware of. Because, see, our lives consist of what it is that we're doing. So our we could say that there's the at the highest level, everything merges. I'm going to state that outright, but at a slightly lower level of awareness or consciousness, we could say that there's a subtle sense of a division, in which there's sense that there's an experiencer, there's the experience itself, and then, which is objectified, and then there's the act of experiencing. So it becomes threefold: experiencer, experience, experiencing. And we can do that same trick with all things, right? So there's like knowing, or the knower, the knowledge, the act of knowing. There's the seer, there's the seen, and there's the act of seeing. There's, etc. We can do that with anything, right? It's a little party trick in which unity appears as a trifold division, in which there's an objectification of both the subject, the object, and then there's this intermediary active principle which connects them. So there's the subject, there's the object, and then there's the verb that connects them. But as I've already said, at the highest level, there is no such division. But from a practical perspective, we're primarily engaged at the level of this threefold division. And this is what I want to look at, because this is where practice makes perfect is an important thing to consider. So we have so we're constantly engaged in practice, but we're not aware of it most of the time. We're not conscious of it. And so we have no idea what it is that we're practicing. Oh, but here's the point I wanted to make is that because there's not really I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but I just want to make this point, which is that all of that activity that we're engaged in is constitutes the life that we experience. So the point of me, I think the point of me making that little diversion about the threefold division is just to say that there is an intimate connection between the subject and the object. I mean, at the highest level, they are one, and so we can't really tease them apart in reality. It just appears as such to us, and so there's what it is that we are perceiving is none other than our own perception. So what I mean by that is that if I'm my experience, which is the objectification, which I am experiencing, and I am the experiencer, they're all interconnected. They are intimately one, and they can't be really meaningfully separated. And so what I'm practicing in my practice, I'm the practicer. They all go together. You can't separate them. So what I'm practicing is in fact my life. And most of the time we don't notice that. We make the mistake of thinking that my life is somehow this objective thing that I'm experiencing, that I'm perceiving, that there actually is this objective thing out there called my life, and that I'm just this I have a relationship to that, but it's not usually clearly defined. As somewhat vague, but there's some sense of being a victim. There's some sense of, that it's happening out there, and I get some level of interaction with it, but it's not entirely clear usually how much level of what that level of interaction is, whether I get to actually how much say I have in the whole thing. But what I'm proposing here is that when we really look closely and tell the truth about it, that it's all inseparable, that I can't ever actually see or experience or know this so-called objective thing out there called my life, independent of my perception of it. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that what I'm practicing is in fact all that I'm experiencing. So what I'm perceiving to be my life, my objective life, is actually just it's inseparable from the practicing that I'm doing. So see if I can say this more clearly. The practicing that I'm doing is what shapes my experience of myself and my life. And then there's no meaningful way to separate that. So if I'm engaged almost all the time in this practice, but the practice that I'm doing is largely unconscious, then this is the trick by which I perceive wrongly that I have this objective life out there that I'm to some degree a victim of, because I'm thinking that I don't know how all of this is happening. I'm not doing it because I'm not aware of all the practicing that I'm doing that is the creation process of what I'm experiencing or perceiving. So first thing is we just want to start to see that that's true, and then we can start to help ourselves by cultivating more conscious awareness. So the more presence, and I talked about this recently when I proposed that one very powerful way that we can help ourselves with that. It's very powerful in some ways. I would say it's very advanced, very simple, but somewhat advanced. Um, is to be aware of the breath, to have just a unitive, mindful awareness of the breath, not trying to do the breath, not trying to control the breath, not trying to, critique the breath, but just to be mindfully present with as the breath. And the more that we can do that, then the more that we are aware of our practicing, for better or for worse. We might start to notice that we're practicing a lot of things that are not congruent with what we want in life, but that awareness is essential, because without that awareness, we'll just continue to mindlessly do the same things, but then play this trick on ourselves where we say, why is everything like this? Well, I'm not doing it. I don't know anything about it. So as usual, I'm taking something very simple and I'm speaking a lot about it, but I'll review just so that we can maybe try to keep it somewhat simple. So we're practicing all the time, and that a lot of the practicing that we're doing, we don't normally think of as being something that we're practicing, because we don't normally think of, oh, I'm practicing my breath, or I'm practicing thinking, or I'm practicing relating. But actually, we are, and that's a really, from my perspective, it's a really important insight uh, to come to for oneself, is to see, just to look and see the truth of this, that the way that I breathe, let's just take that as one example, and we'll look at multiple of these, but we'll start with the way I breathe is unique to me, that there's nobody else who breathes exactly the way that I do. Now, I'm not saying that there is like a one rhythm of breathing that I do that nobody else does. I mean, that may be true as well, but clearly, taken on the whole, if you were to make a visual representation of my breath through the day, and you were to and make a visual representation of somebody else's breath throughout the day, and you were to compare them, you would see visually they look very different. I mean, there's obviously certain similarities, because there will tend to be, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. There has that much in common, but if you consider all the different variations involved, it's an enormous number of variations. So every single person is unique in that regard. And you might say, oh, please, who cares? So what? I mean, come on. What does that matter? Well, I'm just proposing it matters a great deal, actually. But it's something that we don't normally consider. So we're practicing our way of breathing. Now, the other thing is that if you were to visually represent your breathing patterns, and you were to look at that, study that over a long period of time, you would start to see that there are certain patterns that emerge, that you could see that happen, and that they're unique to you. You'll see certain distinct patterns, like under certain types of stress, you would notice that this is the pattern that emerges. When you're excited, this is the pattern that emerges, etc. And so you would start to see that these patterns, not only are they um, unique in some sense to you, but also that they tell you about your state. So when you have that breathing pattern, this is the state that you're experiencing. Now, if you're unaware of that, then this is going to continue, most likely, more or less as it is, unless something comes along in nature and just happens to change it, which could happen, but like a new thing could be introduced. We could call that trauma. And so now there's this new pattern that emerges and that could nudge everything else around. And so these things could change, but it certainly wouldn't be changing by your conscious choice. It would be changing by other factors. So again, uh, you're practicing, I'm just using this as one example, but you could start to recognize that there are certain patterns of breathing that you're practicing where you unconsciously manage your experience through practicing these breathing patterns. So if you love your experience, if you're just having a wonderful experience all the time, then this is not a problem, right? So that would be fine. But to the degree that you're not thrilled with your experience consistently, then I'm proposing that it's worth looking, studying, and possibly making some changes to what you practice. So having awareness of your breath has, we could say, twofold benefits. One is that it brings to into the whole thing this essential ingredient, which we could call conscious awareness. Because if you're not conscious of something, then you can't introduce any change. At least you can't introduce change consciously unless you're conscious. In other words, if you don't if you don't if you're not aware of a pattern, if you don't know that something even exists, you certainly can't produce any change consciously in regard to it. So you have to be aware. So awareness is the fundamental key ingredient for any change, any conscious change. So that's the first thing that this simple yet advanced practice of being aware of your breath offers. In addition to that, it offers you specifically that you can be, not only are you aware, broadly speaking, as in present to your experience, but also you're studying this particular thing, in this case, you're breathing. And so you can start to become aware specifically of patterns that emerge in that. And by becoming aware of those specific patterns, then you start to gather knowledge about this whole thing. And as that knowledge is gathered, then you start to be able to uh, make certain correlations. You can see, oh, yes, as I've already hinted at, when I have this state experience, this is the breathing pattern that I automatically am engaged in. I'm practicing this breathing pattern, and this is the experience that I have. Now, then you can start to ask yourself, do I like that experience? Is that a nice experience for me? Do I enjoy this state? If you do, then that's useful knowledge, because then you say, oh, this breathing pattern might be one that I want to practice more of. I want to consciously practice this breathing pattern. So you start to study that breathing pattern. What's involved in this breathing pattern? How do I do this breathing pattern, both technically and um, and let's say like subjectively what's the experience, so that I start to open up to that subjective experience. It's like with any, I suppose, at least with any art form, there's a technical skill that's involved, but it's also necessary in order to become really masterful, not just to have the technical skill, but to have the inner ease, grace, poise, comfort, relaxation that allows you to exercise that technical skill in a way that is very lovely for you, because otherwise it becomes uptight and it won't be the same. Both certainly subjectively it won't be the same experience, and also objectively it's not going to produce the same kind of result if you're feeling uptight as it would if you're feeling graceful and relaxed. And so um, with this example, as I'm talking about it, I'm saying if you notice that you have a certain state and you are aware of the breathing pattern or the breathing experience that correlates to that state, then you study that both to notice technically what's involved and probably more importantly, subjectively, what's the inner experience of this? How is it that I'm experiencing the grace, the openness, the ease of this? And that turns out to be something that also we can practice. It's more of a subtle thing, but the more that we study what it is that we truly desire, the subtler aspects of that we can also become proficient at. So that's the one side of it. Of course, the other side of it is that we might start to notice that there are other times when I'm experiencing states that I really don't like. And how am I breathing then? What's the experience then? And then we might want to study that just to start to notice this is interesting and useful to notice that every time I'm experiencing this state that I call anxiety or worry or fear or anger or whatever label I might put on the various types of experiences states that I don't like, I can notice, oh, here's how I'm breathing or not breathing. So then we can notice, well, I thought I was a victim of these states. They would just come whimsically, oh, here's the anger again. I hope that it passes soon. Oh, I hope, here's the fear. It must be because of these other people or these circumstances. I hope that these circumstances change soon. Rather than that, we can start to actually look and notice, what is it that I'm practicing? And might I help myself by practicing what it is that I want instead of what I don't want? Rather than saying, oh, I'll just have to wait for the circumstances to change, or I'll have to tense up and try and protect myself against this and brace myself until it changes. I might actually start to do something very different. I might start to see that bracing or resistance or whatever that is, that's actually it's not the solution, but in fact, it's the cause of the state that I don't like. And that the thing that don't seem to be, I'm not in the habit of allowing myself this, practicing this openness, grace, ease, that actually would be the remedy. If only I would be more skilled at it, if only I would allow myself that. So we can begin to consciously practice what it is that we actually want. So hopefully that's somewhat clear, because that's kind of the basic foundation of what I'd like to explore today. And in and of itself, I think that's honestly, I think that's probably enough if a person was to just take that, just that piece, just that much, and do nothing else, only that, just take that to heart sincerely and put it into practice consistently and persistently and sincerely, that would be sufficient. I'm pretty sure to uh, give a person everything that they truly desire. I think that that would be sufficient to uh, give a complete success on all levels. A complete success in the uh, realization and actualization of one's authentic purpose in this life, complete fulfillment on a material level and a emotional level, a spiritual level. I really believe that that's true. So I could just leave it there. That would be probably probably the right thing to do, but I won't. I'll gab on. So, but just to recap, we're always practicing. The majority, overwhelming majority for most of us of what we're practicing, we're unconscious of, and therefore um, are we because we're unconscious of it, we are playing a trick on ourselves in which we uh, feel that we are being victimized by something out there, by life. And if we bring our conscious attention to studying our practice moment to moment, then we have the ability to completely transform that so that we can, number one, cease to play that awful trick on ourselves. And two, we can actually begin to consciously give shape to our experience in ways that we find, well, in any way we want, but obviously we would want to do that in a way that we find pleasing, fulfilling, meaningful. Now, with that said, of course, I did hint at this. Well, I was pretty forthright when I said I think that this, what I proposed there, is a fairly advanced practice. It's very simple. I mean, you can't get a whole lot simpler than that, but also advanced in the sense that, well, I guess in every sense, because what I'm talking about ultimately, the end result of that, we could say, would be enlightenment, or we could give it any number of terms to that, but it would be um, completely integrated living. There would be, like I was talking about, this threefold division of experiencer, experiencing, experience. At the end result of this practice of as I'm proposing it, of course, is the is the realization of the non-division of that reality. So ultimately, it's like the realization is I am that. So that so um, and so it's somewhat advanced in that regard, because most of us are really not. Uh, Most of us our starting point is not that advanced, so I guess it's like sort of like asking a kindergartner to complete uh their thesis for their PhD. It, it's a big ask, because we, most of us, really don't even know where to start in that, and we're going to encounter so many things that will seem to block us, because we'll feel all kinds of feelings that we don't know how to be with. Um, We'll have all kinds of thoughts that we don't know how to be with. I mean, so many things that we'll just react to strongly and have a lot of overwhelm with. So, so what can we do to help ourselves with that? Well, one of the things is that we can realize that uh, I'll give you this image. Okay, so I want you to imagine a river, and you can probably notice the river is flowing, right? So the river flows in a particular direction, right? It goes one way. The water is flowing one direction. It doesn't flow bidirectionally, it flows unidirectionally. So there's an upstream and there's a downstream. And of course, if you follow any river far enough downstream, eventually you get to the ocean. I'm pretty sure that that's true. The Colorado River, I think, no longer qualifies in that regard because it ends up drying up. So there are edge cases where if there's over usage of the water, then it dries up and it doesn't reach the ocean. But apart from that, in general, the rivers eventually reach the ocean. But if you go upstream, then you're going to go to the source of the river. So all rivers have a source. They start somewhere, which is sort of an interesting idea, right? Because you think, well, what is the start of a river? But you can find the start of a river if you follow, and the trick is you follow it upstream. You just have to be patient and follow it upstream. Now, of course, what you'd find is you're following a river upstream is there are tributaries that enter into it. And so what we call a river is actually, when it's many things coming together. So as you follow it upstream, it gets a bit murky as to what is the river and what's not the river. Is tributary not the river? But setting that aside, as we continue with any branch, any tributary that we follow, eventually we get to the point where that has a beginning, and it's going to begin in various ways. A lot of time it will be a spring. So it's a kind of funny idea, really, because to say that's the beginning, because the spring is really just an underground river. So we can say the spring is the emergence of the river, so the beginning of the river above ground. Okay, but nonetheless, the idea here, and the reason that I'm giving you this image, is to say that if you follow the river upstream, you get to its source. So we don't need to. It's actually fine for our purposes right now that we might have a murky sense of what the beginning of a river is. We just want to know that if we follow it upstream, we eventually arrive at its source. So now, in a similar way, if we view our experience, let's say, as a river, or we view ourselves as a river, so it's two ways of saying the same thing: yourself and your experience. Remember, I said this threefold division: experiencer, experience, experiencing. So your experience and the experiencer, which you would call yourself, are the same at the higher level. So yourself, your experience, if you follow that, if you imagine that as a river, or if we call that a river, because it's a process, it's a flowing thing, right? If you observe yourself right now, if you observe your experience right now, you'll see it's flowing. So like a river, you say, well, show me the river. And you'd say, well, I can point you to the river. There it is. But I say, okay, but what is the river there? Can you capture that for me? And if you really try, you'd realize, no, I can't. What exactly is the river? The river is a process. It is a process happening. So we can't capture it as an object, but we can observe it as a process. So your experience, you're a process. You can see the truth of that, right? It's just a flowing. There's thoughts happening. There's sensations happening. There's images happening. Sensations happening. All this stuff is happening. It's a flow occurring. So we say, okay, so I'm a river. I'm like a river. So much like a river, I can, at least, let's say, possibly, I'll propose that we can, but at least hypothetically, theoretically, let's say we could trace the flow of ourselves as a river back upstream, and eventually we arrive at our source. So um, so if we're, and the value of this in this context is just that if we are starting as we are, um, at a not quite as uh, we're not so far upstream, we're not so close in our in our sense of ourselves, we're not so close, we're kind of downstream rather than upstream. So we might have a hard time engaging in a engaging with this advanced practice for long enough, consistently enough, um, to give us the results that we're wanting. I'm not discouraging you against engaging with the practice of, in this case, just breath awareness, because it's really valuable and you can do it and it will help you a lot to do it. But I'm just saying, as you're doing it, you're going to encounter things that you're not going to know what to do with, that will get you, you'll forget that you were doing the practice. You'll fall into fear and anger and all these other things, and you'll lose sight of what you were doing because it's an advanced practice. Um, think about, like, in contrast with that, in contrast with you and me, then there's Ramana Maharshi. So Ramana Maharshi said, I don't know that he said this, but we can imagine he said, I'm done with all of the distraction. I'm done with getting lost. I'm done with all of the pain and confusion of that. I have to go all the way to my source. I have to go all the way upstream. I can't let myself get distracted no matter what happens. And so seeing that, he's knew, okay, go to Arunachala, sit, don't move. And so contrast yourself with that. So Ramana, this very advanced soul, very close to the source, goes and anchors himself so that he's not going to get further from the source. He's going to go all the way upstream. The rest of us, we're further downstream, and the tendency, of course, is as the further downstream you go, the larger the river becomes. So the stronger the flow, the more the more energy and distraction and noise and everything there is. So there's going to be a lot of feeling, a lot of experience, a lot of distraction, a lot happening where we are. So here we are getting, tossed about in all the activity of where we are. So bit by bit, we move upstream. I might forget for most of the day, but once a day, maybe I can remember, okay, just be aware of the breath. For 5 minutes, I can be aware, just aware, not trying to breathe, not trying to control, not trying to do anything, just being aware, just noticing. So I'm just making the contrast of Ramana, who just sits, does not move, and us, because what happens is, for Ramana, I'm not saying that actually, somewhat misleading when I say there's, the river gets larger and there's more energy, yada, 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 because actually there's the same amount everywhere. It's just maybe more concentrated further upstream. And so for Ramana, he encounters all of the same, maybe even more, but he's not, he's unmoving. He sits at Arunachala. Arunachala is not moving. Arunachala is this mountain. It's not moving. Ramana becomes Arunachala. He's not moving. And so whatever appears, and what will appear will be, ultimately it's death. It's everything that has distracted and terrified everybody for all eternity. It's all of everything, everything that has compelled the majority to move. But Raman is anchored, so he's not going to move. So it comes, but he's not going to move. It's like the story of Siddhartha sitting under the Bodhi tree, and the I think it's Mara is the name of this tempter who comes. Is these three big temptations, and one of which is all of the demon armies coming to assault Siddhartha, but he won't move. So it's like that, you know. There's Ramana sitting unmoving. Is all of everything that's ever come uh, to compel people to move, but he won't move. He's Arunachala now. He can't move. But you and me, we encounter these experiences, and in comparison, they're small, they're trifles. But we experience them as very big and overwhelming. You know, it's like, like unexpected expense. You know, oh no, I got it. You know, $2,000 car bill. Oh no, it's the end of the world. You know, I'm so stressed out. What am I going to do? Um, these kinds of things that we encounter that get us very, or oh no, that part, I've lost my good standing in this group of friends, because now they, I made a fool of myself, and they're gonna think badly of me or whatever. We like, so these relatively trivial things we encounter, and they distract us and they overwhelm us. So um, so yes, we should be aware of the breath. This is very important. We should be aware of the breath then too. But to the degree that we need more support, we should also be intelligent and take hold of more support. And so something that I have had the good fortune of learning, being taught, is which I'm passing along to you, is that, and I've taken this long, as usual, long-winded approach to describing the image of a river and upstream and downstream and all this, trying to set the context to help what I'm about to say make sense. Remember that everything ultimately, it merges into one. It's all connected. If we go upstream, eventually we come to our source. The river is never separate from its source. It's so wherever we find ourselves, we're not separate from the source. But in our story about it, in our perception of it, there's a certain level of obscuring of the clarity of the source. And to the degree that there is that obscuring, then what we're experiencing are, we could say, desires or attachments. So we've probably heard these kinds of notions before in Eastern philosophical context. They're usually the enemy. Desire and attachment is the enemy. But actually, I want to suggest to you that desire and attachment are not the enemy. They're not inherently problematic. They certainly can be problematic when we encounter them unconsciously. But when we encounter them consciously with the right attitude, they, far from being problematic, they're the gateway that leads us upstream, closer to the clarity of our source. So if I'm encountering something that seems overwhelming to me, fear, anxiety, worry, distress of any kind, anger, resentment, grief, then I could say, oh, this is bad. I'm experiencing attachment. I'm experiencing desire. I have desire is not always this sort of like, I'm longing for this, like I want this thing. Desire could also be desire to get rid of, right? So it's like, if I'm experiencing fear, I'm experiencing desire, very strong desire to avoid something. So I'm experiencing some desire. So I'm going to use the word desire to refer to all of this whole kind of thing, this whole phenomenon of which we could call strong emotions, attachment, etc. But I'm just going to call it desire. So when I'm encountering some desire and that desire seems to be overwhelming or distracting to me, rather than that being a problem, I can embrace that as an opportunity for me. And so I can look at it in this sense that I have a particular habitual relationship with this desire. So, and I feel compelled to practice that same thing that I normally do. So you could notice, let's take the example of fear, because I think everybody has probably experiences fear somewhat regularly. It's a pretty prominent feature of most of our lives, I would guess. And if not fear, you can substitute whatever you want. I mean, whatever fits for you. You could anger, grief, lust, whatever it is for you. But I'll say fear just as the word that I'm going to use. So if I'm encountering fear, then I can notice, okay, I'm experiencing this. I'm doing some practice. So I'm practicing certain ways of breathing, certain ways of thinking, certain ways of imagining. So I can just notice that. And then I can notice I have to slow down to do this because normally this all happens very fast. And when it happens very fast, and I've talked about this in another context before, fast equals unconscious. So we want it to be conscious, so we want to slow down. So I have to realize, okay, here I am, I'm encountering this thing that I normally encounter it unconsciously. It turns out to be problematic for me. And so I want to slow it down. So I just notice how I can slow down inwardly, just slow down, just slow it down. Usually involves some kind of relaxation, inner spaciousness. And then I can notice, okay, in that spaciousness, in that slowing down, now there's more conscious awareness. So I can start to observe what are the practices that I'm doing. So I start to notice I'm practicing, as I've said, this way of thinking. So I have thoughts about it. What am I thinking about this? And it might seem like how could this be useful to become aware of the thoughts that I'm thinking? Well, just find out. You'll notice that you're thinking certain thoughts, and those thoughts actually are not very helpful. Neither are they very true. So it might have been last week that I suggested this exploration as kind of like analysis of the thoughts, where I proposed using the Byron Katie's framework. It's just one framework that can be used. It's a useful framework. So we could analyze the thoughts. We could just look to see, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Is it true? How can I know that that's true? And when I'm believing that this is true, how do I behave? How am I feeling? Do I like that? So you can start to see the kind of entrancement and the power that carries of this habit of thinking. So start to just be aware of that, and then start to notice the breathing that's involved. So there's going to be a breathing pattern that's involved, and you can start to notice the kinds. It goes along usually with the thinking, but also there'll be imagining, so images, which could be we would conceive of them as being memories, or they could just be fantasy projections, but in either case, they're images that are being cast on the screen of the mind presently. So that's their actual substance and nature, is just that they're present moment images being cast on the screen of the mind. So we can just be aware of those and start to see, are these helpful? Okay, so then we can start to move through that gateway in a toward in the direction of upstream, and we can do this by means of becoming aware of what do I actually want, and then beginning to engage consciously in the utilizing the same processes that I'm presently using to generate this unwanted state, except I'm going to start to use them consciously to produce what it is that I do want. So if I'm experiencing fear, then I can start to analyze and see, as I'm slowing down, I can see, okay, well, here's how it plays out unconsciously. When it's unconscious, then it's leading me further downstream. And so I'm becoming more and more unconscious, more and more in the grip of all of this. I'm practicing unconsciously all of these terrible things, this way of breathing that produces this physiological state that's not very pleasant, and these thoughts that are very skewed and scary, and these images that likewise are very skewed and scary. And I'm taking all of that to be the truth. And so I'm casting a spell, conjuring this reality, this perception, and I'm mistaking that to be the ultimate reality, the fundamental reality, some kind of objective reality that I'm a victim of. And it's just washing me downstream. But as I slow down, I can see, wait, here's this what I'm calling fear, or fill in the blank with whatever it is you call it. Actually, it's not what I thought it was. It's a gateway, and I could just as easily go upstream as downstream. So I can use these same faculties, but I can start to use them in service of what I want rather than what I don't want, because unconsciously I'm practicing what I don't want. And no big surprise, I get more of what I don't want when I do that. But of course, as I've already pointed out, because I'm doing it unconsciously, I think that it's happening to me and I'm a victim of it. But when I slow down and become conscious of it, I can start to see, wait, it's not happening to me, I'm doing it, albeit unconsciously. But now I'm conscious of it, and rather than playing this terrible trick on myself, I can actually start to create what I do want. So this desire, which could be fear or lust or anger or whatever, but the desire is just a gateway. It's not inherently problematic. And when I bring consciousness into it, it brings me upstream rather than downstream. So how do I do that, practically speaking? So I'm in this moment, I'm just going to use again this example of fear, but you could again do this with anything, any variation. It doesn't have to be fear, it could be anything, but just to make it hopefully clear, I'm going to use the example of fear. So I'm presently engaged in this unconscious act of practicing what I call fear. And now I'm slowing down, becoming conscious, and I notice, okay, here is how I create this experience that I call fear. I breathe in this way, I think in this way, I imagine in this way, I'm relating to my experience in this way. But I don't want to do that any longer. And so now that I'm aware of the technical skills involved, I can make use of those same technical skills, but consciously, to create what I do want. So what if I'm experiencing fear and I don't like this? Well, clearly, what do I want? I want peace. We could call that by any name, but I'm just going to use the word peace. I want peace. So let me now begin to consciously engage with these faculties, same faculties that I've been using to generate this experience of fear. Let me engage with those to pass through this gateway upstream to create what I do want, which is peace. So, do I have any familiarity with any way of breathing that it corresponds to what I would consider to be peace? Of course, the more I've practiced at this, the more that I'm aware of this, the more uh, knowledge that I have, then the easier this will be. At first, it's not maybe as easy. I mean, definitely not as easy because you're not going to be as skilled at it. So, still requires that you're willing to persist in this practice. You can't insist that it has to work, you know, like that perfectly instantaneously the first time. It might, but might not. So, like any skill, you just have to stay with it and keep practicing. But you will get better the more you practice it. But you just okay. Maybe at the very least I could notice that I could start to let my breath become relaxed. Maybe I could let my face relax. Maybe I could stop gritting my teeth. Maybe I could let myself breathe instead of holding my breath and then gasping for breath alternatingly. I could actually just let the breath be relaxed, smooth, comfortable. Then I could start to notice, okay, what am I thinking? I'm thinking these terrible thoughts, scary thoughts, and start to say, okay, how do I know that that's true? I have to tell the truth. I don't really know that's true. Well, what else is possible? Could I start to expand my thinking about this, open to other ways of thinking about it that might be useful? So if I'm afraid, I'm probably thinking that there's a threat and that I'm in danger. Well, so many different variations on what could be useful. I mean, I'll just propose one that's sort of like a catch-all. I think it's the most useful, but it requires that you are willing to cultivate or I'll say cultivate a relationship with the divine. But if you're willing to cultivate a relationship with the divine, then honestly, you have to start to think in the right way, and you have to start to put that into motion consciously. It's not going to happen automatically. You have to start to choose this, and you have to start to think intelligently and say, I have a relationship with the divine. The divine is the supreme intelligence, the supreme being, the all in all. The I am necessarily perfectly safe. No matter what happens, no matter what my judgments of what happens, no matter what other reactions might occur within me based on fear and false thinking about things, I have to know and trust that everything is being taken care of for the very highest good, that in the deepest sense, I am being delivered to the greatest possible truth. And there is no greater power that I am I am uniting myself with the supreme power. So there is nothing that could actually, in truth, harm me. Like the what is it? The 23rd Psalm, is that the one? The Lord's Prayer is not the Lord's Prayer. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. That one is a useful one if you're so inclined, to know that kind of truth, to affirm that truth. And so that can be a useful way of thinking. So just one way. I'm not saying that's the only thought that could be helpful, but that's one very powerful way. But you need to start to see, I'm thinking in bad ways. I don't really know that these thoughts are true. So what might be more useful ways of thinking? More congruent with what I want, more congruent with what I deeply intuitively know to be the truth. Because actually, intuitively, all of us know that who we are is much, we could call it greater, or um, mm, we could say independent. It is independent of all of the things that we fear. So, all the things that I fear, they apply to the personality, to the body. But I know that who I am, intuitively at least, I know that who I am is not dependent upon these things. I'm not denying that I have a body. I'm not saying the body is problematic. We should be grateful that we have bodies. But I know that I'm not limited to the body, that the body is not the exclusive self. And so the fears apply to the body, but I'm not limited to the body. The fears apply to the personality, but I'm not limited to the personality. So at least intuitively, I know that the fears are applying to these things, but that I am transcendent of those, or I am greater than those things, that who I am in the deepest, truest sense is not limited by these things. So we just need to start to think about it consciously, choosing our thinking process so that it's congruent with what we want. And then similarly with the images, we can just let ourselves be dominated by whatever images we're in the habit of imagining. But it's like you could just keep watching the horror movie, but it's like nobody ever told you you've got all these other DVDs, but you just keep playing this one, Scream 45. You just keep playing that one. Why? The first 44 were terrible. I can't imagine the 45th was good. But you just keep watching that one, and it's getting spooked every time. And it's just because it didn't occur to you that you had other options. So we want to start to consciously choose the images. And again, this is not necessarily we won't be necessarily very skilled at it at first. So we'd be wrong and mistaken to demand that we should or have to be. But we want to start to make conscious use of these faculties and start to work with them to start to produce the experience that we want. And the point here that I'm making with this is that it moves us through the gateway of this desire. And I'm using the word desire because it works equally with whatever you want to call it. I mean, whether you think it's a positive or a negative thing, you could call it would work with fear, it would work with lust, it would work with anger, it would work with longing. It works with all of these things. And so but you can start to move through the gateway upstream and through the fulfillment of the authentic desire. You see, if I'm afraid, what is it that I really want? I want peace. I want safety. Well, then it's awfully foolish to continue to practice the opposite of that. So instead, but I just do it because I do it unconsciously. When I'm conscious, I can start to choose consciously to practice what I actually want. Then I can begin to fulfill that authentic desire. And through the fulfillment of that authentic desire, bit by bit, I'm moving upstream. So we don't have to, we can start to fill in the gap. If we find that there's seems like this enormous gap between me and Ramana. Ramana, it's like, oh, how could Ramana just sit there? How could he, like, I can't just sit there because I have all of these attachments. I feel like I've got, I'm attached to the body, I'm attached to my family, I'm attached to these, well, that kind of sums it up. But, whatever you're attached to, you've got these attachments, and you say, got these attachments. I can't just sit there like Ramana, because Ramana just sat there and in sitting there risks everything. The body's going to be eaten by insects. And so it's to risk everything. And we say, I can't risk everything because I've got too many attachments. So how can we close the gap if we see the sense in closing the gap? Then what I'm proposing is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing. It's not like, okay, either you're going to go to Arunachala and sit like Ramana and let the insects eat the flesh, or you're just going to suffer interminably. I'm saying bit by bit, we can work intelligently by practicing consciously to fulfill our desires. And the brilliant thing about this is that I've just spelled it out in a way that's even, we could say, even more advanced, not more advanced in the first practice, but a fairly advanced version of what I'm getting at. But we can do this even at a lower level. So if, honest to goodness, if you say, you know, what I want, actually, I really just want, I want to be a millionaire. Now, many of you might roll your eyes and say that's a very low level sort of desire. You know, like that's not going to get anybody anything good. That's just fraught with problems, wanting to be a millionaire. But I'm just using this as an example because let's say you honestly, sincerely look at yourself and your situation, and what you conclude is, I really just want to be a millionaire. That's what I'm about. That's what I've come here for. I need to fulfill that. I need to be a millionaire. I can't be satisfied unless I become a millionaire. Okay, well, great. That's really good that you've been able to identify that, and whatever the desire might be. And it doesn't have to be just one desire, whatever desires surface. If you have this desire and you can't seem to get around it, it doesn't seem to resolve any other way, then stop denying it, and you can use the same process that I'm describing in order to resolve that, because guess what? It moves you upstream. If you're constantly being frustrated and not um, uh, uh, achieving your desired outcome, or you're denying it, even worse, then you're still being swept downstream by unconscious practicing of what you don't want. So better, much better to fulfill your desire, whatever it might be. And I mean, I guess that I'll add a condition here, which is that you should only use this for desire that is not not designed to harm others. Okay, so you should always be willing to frame your desires in terms of something that will be a win-win situation for everybody. So if you're saying, I want to be a millionaire and I want everybody else to be suffering in poverty, no, don't do that. But so I want to be a millionaire and everybody else is fine. Everybody else can, I don't need to impinge on anybody else's life. Great. Or if you say, I want to be a millionaire and I want to use my millions to benefit humanity, even better. Great. But as long as your desires are not intended to harm others, then if they're really desires that you authentically have, whatever your judgments of them might be, use this process to start to accomplish or achieve those desires, because it moves you upstream, and then bit by bit you get more and more clarity about what you really want. Because see, Ramana Ramana had the clarity that what he really wanted was to be with the self. There was nothing else that he wanted more than he wanted that. I mean, I'm sure there were other desires, but the clarity was, this is the only thing that I truly want. And what I'm suggesting is, for the rest of us, we don't have that level of clarity. We have all these other things that we think we want, and maybe just a few things. But for some of us, it's just a few things, and for others, there's a lot of things, because we think, I want the big house, and I want the Ferrari, and I want the whatever I think I want. But through the using this practice, this notion that practice makes perfect, and if we're consciously applying, if we're consciously practicing and doing what it is that moves us in the direction of fulfilling our desire, then we're moving ourselves in a good direction. Because as soon as we fulfill the desire, guess what? Like I've pointed out, whack-a-mole, next one comes. Like, oh, I thought that was it, but now I find out that I want something else. Because what happens is, as we fulfill the desires, we realize there was something underneath that. So again, like, we're moving upstream, so there's increasing clarification about who am I really? Like, along the way, these other tributaries were coming in, and so I got confused, thinking, oh, I was that. So there's this tributary that comes in and says, I need to be a millionaire. And so at a certain point, I can get confused by that. I'm like, oh, that's me. I need to be a millionaire. That's who I am. But once we clear that, once we move through that gateway and we're upstream of that, then it's not there. That desire is no longer there. So we're not going to be confused by it. But then we start. Then there's this other desire that surfaces or that emerges, or it becomes clearer to us, and we're like, oh, now I have this desire. So as we continue to work with this, then we keep moving upstream, that we have fewer and fewer desires because they've been fulfilled, but then the essential desires are clearer. And eventually, of course, the we could say the fundamental desire is the desire to know yourself and to be yourself. So to merge with your source. But you see, the process is just as I've described it, that we start to consciously practice what it is that we actually want, practicing for the fulfillment of our desire in an intelligent way. So consciously practicing. So I've gone fairly over time, but I'll just recap. So the idea here is practice makes perfect. Most of the time, we're practicing primarily unconsciously what we don't want, and then no big surprise, we get a whole lot of what we don't want. And then we make the mistake, because it was all unconscious, of believing that it's being done to us, that we're victims of it, and we just throw our arms up and say, woe is me, I don't know how all this happened, and I'm powerless in the whole situation. But when we have courage, and we're willing to look sincerely, then, and we begin to do so, then we can apply all the ideas that I've shared today to begin to be conscious. And the simplest way to do that is, as I'm proposing it, is just slow down, notice your breathing. And then you'll start to, you will start to, and you should consciously begin to examine what it is that you're practicing. How are you breathing? How are you thinking? What are you imagining? And then start to see what it is that you're desiring in a positive way. So it may be you're seeing it only in a negative way, but see, what is it you're actually desiring? You don't want to be fearful. You're just practicing being fearful. You're in the habit of only seeing fear and resisting the fear. But what is it you actually want? And you call that peace, or security, or okayness, or whatever you call it. But you get clarity on that, and then begin to practice that. Or if you say, I want, what I really want is $1 million, great, then practice that. Practice consciously. So how would you practice having $1 million? How would you practice being a millionaire? I mean, that seems like, how could you do that? Well, in order to be a millionaire, see, this is the trick. It's plenty of people, I mean, it's not that many, but a number of people can and will accumulate $1 million, multiple millions of dollars at times in their lives, but they can't hold on to it. They're not really millionaires. So to actually be a millionaire is different than having $1 million. And if you want to be a millionaire, then you need to practice being a millionaire. And it's not about having $1 million. It's about having the consciousness of being a millionaire. So you can absolutely begin to practice that. You have to start to see how you sabotage your desire to be a millionaire by all of the bad, wrong practicing that you do, the practicing of scarcity, etc. And you need to begin to practice what you want. So you have to practice having an abundant consciousness. You have to practice the feeling, the imagery, the thinking, so that you are prepared to be a millionaire, so that when the million or 2 million or $100 million comes your way, that you are ready for it, so that you can properly take your place as a bona fide millionaire rather than a fraud. So practicing what you want can be applied to anything, and I'm proposing should be, because in this way we're moving upstream, we're fulfilling the desires that otherwise are pulling us, dragging us downstream unconsciously, when we approach them consciously, we move through them as gateways that lead us upstream, closer and closer to the realization of our deepest desire, which is to know the self, in which we find the true fulfillment. So I hope that I've made that clear. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining, as always. And I'm going to end this recording, but for those who are here live, if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A. So I'll just end this recording now.